Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Ever imagine hopping into a time machine and landing right in the early 1900s?
Oh, yeah.
We're kind of doing that today,
Okay.
but with a specific focus.
Hmm.
The journey to the Civil Rights Movement. We're going to uncover the foundation, the groundwork laid between 1900 and 1945.
Okay.
Really understand how it all began.
Sounds good.
Our guide for this trip, it's this fascinating podcast lecture called Foundations of the Civil Rights Movement, African Americans, 1900 to 1945.
Yeah, it's a period that some people call the long civil rights movement,
Oh, really?
which might surprise you.
Yeah.
We tend to think of the 50s and 60s as
Yeah.
the defining decades for the civil rights movement.
Right.
But this earlier era is really critical
Oh, okay.
for understanding the context and the struggles and the strategies that led to those big events that we all know about.
Okay, so picture this. African Americans in the early 1900s facing, daily segregation and discrimination.
Right.
But here's the thing. In the middle of all these challenges, a powerful surge of Black consciousness emerges.
Right.
And that's really what sets the scene for some truly remarkable activism.
It really is. It's a time of just immense tension,
Yeah.
but also just incredible resilience.
Yeah.
Kind of think of it like a pressure cooker.
Oh.
All this talent, frustration, this unwavering determination, all just all simmering away,
Yeah.
waiting for the right moment to just boil over.
And we're going to meet some just incredible figures
Yeah.
who tackle this challenge in really different ways.
Yeah.
We've got Booker T. Washington and his focus on economic empowerment.
Yeah.
And then W.E.B. Du Bois and his fight for immediate equality.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no one-size-fits-all approach.
No, and that's what's so interesting about this era.
Yeah.
It's conflicting visions, strategic debates,
Yeah.
and ultimately this just unwavering commitment to progress.
So are you ready to dive in with us into this really crucial period and see how these early efforts help shape history?
Let's get into it.
All right, let's unpack some of these different approaches
Okay.
that emerged during this pivotal time.
Right.
First up, we have Booker T. Washington,
Mm-hmm.
who was a really prominent advocate for what historians call the accommodationist approach.
Right.
So think about this. He was born into slavery,
Wow.
later freed,
Right.
and then becomes this leading voice urging Black Americans to focus on economic advancement
Right.
through vocational training.
Mm.
To a lot of people, it seemed like a pretty passive approach,
Yeah.
but in reality, it was very strategic.
Yeah, his message really resonated with white Southerners
Oh,
because it didn't directly, challenge segregation.
oh,
So it allowed Black communities to quietly build institutions and economic power.
right.
And that created a foundation for future activism.
So playing the long game,
Exactly.
kind of like setting up a base camp before you climb a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Pretty clever.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, not everyone agreed with this.
Right.
And that's where W.E.B. Du Bois enters the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant scholar.
Yes.
He was the first African-American to earn a Ph.D. from Harvard.
From Harvard.
Yeah.
Wow.
He had a very different view
Yeah, you did.
than Booker T. Washington.
Absolutely.
Du Bois believed in what he called the talented 10th,
Mm-hmm.
which was the idea that a highly educated Black elite would lead the charge
Right.
for equality.
Yeah.
He argued for immediate political rights and full integration.
It's a much more confrontational approach than Washington's,
Yeah, definitely.
for sure.
It's amazing to see how these two influential figures had
Yeah,
just such different approaches to such a complex problem.
it is.
Did either approach gain more traction in the community?
Well, Du Bois, he was a man of action.
Okay.
In 1909, he co-founded the NAACP,
Okay.
the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
And it quickly became a really powerful force for change. The NAACP's strategy focused on using the legal system
Okay.
to dismantle segregation,
Hmm.
which was very forward-thinking at the time.
Yeah.
They meticulously documented the inequalities of separate but equal facilities, and they laid the groundwork for those future legal battles
Oh, okay.
that would have a lasting impact on the fight for civil rights.
Using the legal system to fight discrimination, that's something we still see even today.
Absolutely.
It's a testament to Du Bois' vision.
It is.
But while these legal battles were sort of brewing,
Yeah.
Another powerful force was emerging,
Okay.
the rise of Black consciousness,
Right.
particularly through art and culture.
This is where the Harlem Renaissance comes in.
Oh,
It
okay.
was just this cultural explosion
Yeah.
in the 1920s
Okay.
that celebrated Black art, literature, and intellectual achievements.
Wow.
It wasn't just about creativity. It was about reclaiming and redefining Black identity
Yeah.
in the face of, pervasive racism.
Yeah, it's incredible to think about the impact
Yeah.
of figures like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston during this time.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, their work didn't just entertain, it really gave a voice
Yeah.
to the Black experience. And it resonated deeply with people
Yeah.
and contributed to a sense of shared identity and pride.
They really explored themes of Black identity, resilience, and just the richness of Black culture. And it offered this powerful counter-narrative
Right.
to the stereotypes and prejudices of the time.
Yeah, it was a cultural revolution.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It really was.
But we also see a different, perhaps more controversial approach
Okay.
to Black empowerment emerging around the same time.
Okay.
And that's Marcus Garvey
Right.
and his organization, the UNIA.
Yeah, Garvey was a Jamaican immigrant, really charismatic leader who preached Black nationalism and self-reliance.
Okay.
And his message back to Africa really resonated deeply
Yeah.
with those who were feeling alienated by white society. He advocated for separation, not integration,
Oh, wow.
which really put him at odds with Du Bois and the NAACP.
Wow. It's so interesting how these totally contrasting approaches
Yeah.
were happening at the same time.
It's fascinating.
On one hand, you've got the NAACP fighting for integration through the courts, and then on the other, you've got Garvey calling for a separate Black nation.
Right. It speaks to the complexity of the situation.
For sure.
There was no one-size-fits-all solution
Right.
to this deeply entrenched racism.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about strategy. It was about identity, too.
Yeah.
Like the Harlem Renaissance wasn't just about art and literature. It
Right.
was about, reclaiming and celebrating Black culture.
Absolutely.
And I think it's so interesting that Garvey's message, with its emphasis on Black pride and self-reliance, really resonated so strongly,
Yeah.
even though it was so different from Du Bois.
Right.
What do you think explains that?
It highlights the diversity of thought
Yeah.
and the range of emotions within the Black community at the time.
Yeah.
For some, the path to equality meant working within the system.
Right.
And for others, it meant creating a separate space,
Right.
totally free from white society.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And let's not forget the role of the labor movement in this story.
Yes.
This is where a Philip Randolph steps in.
Right.
Just a remarkable figure in the fight for economic justice.
He understood that economic power
Yeah.
could be leveraged to achieve broader social and political goals. He founded the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters,
Okay.
which was the first all-Black union
Wow.
recognized by a major corporation.
That's huge.
It was a huge victory. It gave Black workers a voice, bargaining power. But his vision went way beyond just labor rights.
Yeah, he saw the fight for economic justice as totally linked to the fight for racial equality, right?
Exactly.
It wasn't just about better wages. It was about dismantling the systems
Yes.
that kept Black workers marginalized and oppressed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Randolph was a master strategist, using his platform to push for broader societal change,
Yeah.
for sure. One of the most brilliant examples of his strategic thinking was this threat to organize a mass march on Washington.
Oh, wow.
In 1941
Okay.
to protest racial discrimination in defense industries during World War II.
It was a pretty bold move.
It was,
Yeah.
especially considering the political climate. I mean, the country was on the brink of war,
Yeah.
and President Roosevelt really couldn't afford a PR nightmare on the home front.
Right.
That potential for disruption,
Yeah.
coupled with the moral implications of fighting for democracy abroad
Yeah.
while upholding discrimination at home,
Right.
it kind of forced his hand.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
And so that pressure leads to Executive Order 8802,
Right.
which banned discrimination in defense industries.
Yeah. Now, you might think,
Okay.
okay, it only covered defense industries.
Correct.
But think about what this meant.
Yeah.
This was one of the first federal actions against employment discrimination.
Wow.
this paved the way for future legislation, setting a really powerful precedent.
Yeah, totally.
It signaled a shift in the federal government's role in addressing racial inequality.
Right.
Even if it was driven by, wartime necessity.
Sure.
Of course.
So we've got this this incredibly dynamic landscape.
Yeah.
We've got the legal challenges through the NAACP, the cultural awakening of the Harlem Renaissance,
Right.
labor activism spearheaded by figures like Randolph,
Yeah.
and then, of course, World War II looming.
Right.
Talk about a pivotal moment.
Absolutely. And you can't underestimate the war's impact on the fight for civil rights. Imagine Black Americans fighting for democracy abroad
Yeah.
while facing segregation and discrimination back home.
Right.
It's a paradox
Totally.
that fueled what became known as the Double V campaign.
Double victory. Victory against fascism overseas
Mm-hmm.
and victory against racism in America.
Exactly. And it's sadly relevant even today.
Yeah, it really is.
It seems like every generation has to fight this fight on two fronts.
I know, it's so true.
But it really captured the spirit of the moment.
Yeah.
Black Americans were determined to help in the war effort,
Mm-hmm.
but they were equally determined to secure their own rights as citizens.
And it wasn't just about, like, slogans and campaigns.
Right?
The NAACP saw a huge surge in membership during the war.
Yeah.
And Black activism just became much more visible,
Yeah.
really challenging the status quo.
Absolutely. But as we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
this period was also marked by this sense of frustration and disillusionment. A lot of Black soldiers having, risked their lives for freedom abroad,
Yeah.
they came home
Yeah.
and faced the same old barriers.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. It's tragic.
It's like fighting for a dream
Yeah.
and then having it snatched away when you come home.
Exactly.
But I guess that also kind of speaks to the resilience
It does.
of the human spirit, to never give up.
It's inspiring.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Absolutely.
So we've seen all these efforts, these different approaches to fighting for equality.
Yeah.
But it's like we've laid out all these puzzle pieces,
Yeah.
individuals, organizations, movements. But now we need to figure out how they all fit together
Right.
to really understand the big picture.
Yeah.
So how do historians make sense of all of this?
Well, it's not a simple story.
Yeah.
Like the traditionalist historians,
Mm-hmm.
they emphasize the groundwork laid by, these early activists.
Oh.
They see figures like Washington, Du Bois, and Randolph
Right.
as crucial in shaping the strategies and goals of the later civil rights movement.
Oh.
They highlight the importance of laying the foundation,
Yeah.
building institutions, and raising awareness.
But it sounds like progressive historians have a slightly different take.
They do, yeah.
Yeah.
They tend to focus more on the role of labor movements
Right.
in
Yeah.
empowering Black communities. They see people like Randolph as bridging that gap between labor rights and civil rights,
Right.
and showing how economic justice and racial justice are intertwined.
Yeah, it makes sense
Yeah.
when you think about it.
Secure a livelihood,
Right.
a way to support your family,
Mm-hmm.
gain economic power,
Yeah,
and then that translates into political power.
makes sense.
And then you have scholars who use critical race theory,
Right.
which examines the systemic racism that all these activists had to face.
Right.
They point out the limits of a system that was designed
Yeah.
to uphold white supremacy,
Yeah.
highlighting the challenges they had to deal with.
Yeah, even in their victories.
Exactly.
It's an important lens to consider
It is.
because it forces us to acknowledge these deep-seated biases
Yeah.
and power structures
For sure.
that are all over our society.
And then, of course, we can't forget the Black nationalist perspective,
Right,
which
right.
emphasizes figures like Garvey
yeah.
and the UNIA.
Their focus on Black self-reliance
Right.
and cultural pride,
Yeah.
that resonated with a lot of people.
It did. And their legacy still continues to influence Black consciousness
Yeah.
and activism today.
I think it's just amazing how this one period
Yeah.
can be interpreted in so many different ways.
It's fascinating.
And they all offer these valuable insights.
Right.
Yeah, I think it just goes to show how complex this struggle for equality really was.
It really does.
Makes me wonder, how did all these successes and
Yeah.
limitations of these early movements
Yeah.
shape the strategies and goals of activists in the 50s and 60s?
Right.
How did they, build upon what had already been accomplished?
Mhm.
And what new challenges did they have to face?
It's a crucial question,
For sure.
and it's definitely something to think about
Yeah.
as we reflect on this period.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to wrap up part 2.
Okay.
But before we do,
Yeah.
I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. You know, we often associate the civil rights movement with like those iconic marches
Yeah.
and protests of the 50s and 60s.
Right.
But the truth is, the seeds of change were planted much earlier.
Yeah, it's like a slow-burning fuse,
Mhm.
gradually building intensity.
Yeah.
And then finally, boom,
It
it
ignites.
ignites. Exactly.
All those strategies, the debates, the cultural shifts,
Mm-hmm.
they all laid the groundwork
They did.
for that explosive movement
Absolutely.
that we, think of
Yeah.
when we think about the civil rights era.
Classic civil rights era.
It's just incredible how actions
Yeah.
taken decades before can have such a big impact
It's true.
on later events.
Yeah.
I mean, so much of what we take for granted today,
Right.
like equal access to education and jobs and public spaces,
For sure.
it's all a result of those who came before us.
Absolutely.
Their legacy is woven into everything.
It is. Yeah.
And that's why it's just so important to understand this period, to learn from it.
Right. To learn from their struggles, their
Yeah.
victories, and even their setbacks.
Like we're standing on the shoulders of giants,
We really are.
and it's up to us to continue that work.
Yeah. To push for progress.
Challenge
To
injustice.
keep fighting the good fight.
That's the challenge, isn't it?
It is to use those historical insights and apply them to the present, to honor their sacrifices by continuing their work.
Yeah, it's not about just dwelling in the past.
Right.
It's about using it.
Using it to illuminate the present
Yeah,
and guide our actions
Right.
toward a better future.
perfectly said.
Thank you.
As we wrap up this deep dive into the foundations of the civil rights movement,
Okay.
I want to leave everyone
Yeah.
with a final thought.
Right.
So as you go about your day,
Mm-hmm.
think about this.
Okay.
How do those echoes
Mm-hmm.
of this early activism
Yeah.
still affect our world?
Right.
What lessons can we learn from these pioneers of social change?
It's a great question.
And how can we contribute to the ongoing fight for justice?
It's a journey we're all a part of.
So well said, understanding the past
Yeah.
to shape the future.
Absolutely.
And history is not just something that happened a long time ago.
Right.
It's alive.
It's relevant to our lives.
It's relevant. It's up to all of us
Yeah.
to learn from it.
Absolutely.
Carry on the legacy
Mm-hmm.
of those who fought so hard for a better world.
Keep questioning, keep learning,
Yeah.
and keep pushing
Yes.
for a more just and equitable world.
So well said.
Thanks.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the foundations of the civil rights movement.
That was great.
I hope you learned something.
Yeah, me too.
Until next time,
See ya there.
keep diving deep.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings' History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.